You want to send her undercover? Into the Rossi organization?
I'm not suggesting undercover work. I'm suggesting remote infiltration. I can access their systems from here.
The conference room went silent when I suggested infiltrating the Rossi family servers. Not the thoughtful kind of silence. The kind that comes before someone laughs in your face. My name is Chen, and I'm a fat girl sitting in a room full of federal agents who just realized their star cybersecurity contractor doesn't look like what they expected. What they didn't know yet was that I was the only person in the entire FBI field office who could actually pull off what they needed. And the man whose empire I was about to infiltrate was going to learn that lesson the hardest way possible. You want to send her undercover? Special Agent Marcus Webb said, not even trying to hide his skepticism. Into the Rossi organization? I watched his eyes travel over my body. The assessment was quick but obvious. Too fat to be a cocktail server. Too visible to blend in. Too different from the sleek, thin women who populated the edges of organized crime like expensive accessories. I'm not suggesting undercover work, I said calmly. I'm suggesting remote infiltration. I can access their systems from here. I've already mapped their network architecture based on the preliminary intelligence you provided. Assistant Director Lauren Price leaned forward. She was the one who'd hired me, the only person in this room who'd actually read my credentials instead of just looking at my LinkedIn photo and making assumptions. Explain how you'd do it, she said. I pulled up the presentation I'd prepared. Network diagrams. Security vulnerabilities. Entry points. The Rossi family runs their legitimate businesses through Rossi Capital Management. High-rise office in the financial district. They think their systems are secure because they paid a lot of money for security theater. Firewalls, encryption, the usual. But they made a critical mistake. Which is? Webb asked. They let their legitimate IT department handle infrastructure for both their legal and illegal operations. Same network backbone. Same authentication protocols. I can get into their real estate holding servers and from there, I can pivot into everything else. Their books. Their communications. Everything you need to build your RICO case. Webb exchanged glances with the other agents. How long would it take? To get in? 3 days. To extract enough evidence to justify warrants? 2 weeks. And they won't detect you? Not if I'm careful. And I'm always careful. Price nodded. Do it. You have authorization to proceed. The meeting broke up. As agents filed out, I heard Webb mutter to his partner, "This is insane. We're trusting our entire investigation to someone who looks like she should be working IT support, not infiltrating the mob." His partner, Agent Torres, replied quietly, "She graduated top of her class at MIT. She's broken into systems the NSA couldn't crack. Maybe we should trust Price's judgment. Or maybe Price is being politically correct and we're about to blow a 3-year investigation." I pretended not to hear. I'd been pretending not to hear things like that my entire life. That night, in my apartment filled with monitors and servers that hummed like a technological heartbeat, I began my infiltration of Alessandro Rossi's empire. Alessandro Rossi was 42 years old, third-generation Mafia royalty who'd modernized his family's operations while maintaining their brutal reputation. He ran legitimate investments as cover for money laundering, drug trafficking, and extortion. He was handsome in that dangerous way that made people forget he'd personally ordered at least a dozen murders. He was also, according to FBI intelligence, beginning to suspect he had a leak somewhere in his organization. Which made this timing either perfect or catastrophic. I started exactly where I said I would. The Rossi Capital Management server farm, hosted in a data center downtown. Their security was expensive but lazy. Good encryption on the outside. Barely any monitoring on the inside. Like a house with a steel door and no locks on the windows. It took me 47 hours to establish my first foothold. A backdoor buried in a routine maintenance script that would let me slip in and out without triggering alerts. Then I waited. Watched. Learned the rhythms of their network traffic. Who logged in when. What systems processed what data? Where the interesting files were kept. On day 6, I found the accounting files. The real ones. The ones that showed exactly how Rossi laundered money through shell companies, fake real estate transactions, and a web of international transfers that would take prosecutors months to untangle. I copied everything. Encrypted. Stored. Documented. On day 9, I found the communications. Encrypted messages between Alessandro and his lieutenants. Discussions of shipments, territories, payments to corrupt officials. All of it admissible in court if we could prove authenticity. I was building the FBI's case one file at a time, invisible in the digital shadows of a criminal empire. Then I found something I wasn't looking for. A folder marked Project Lighthouse. Inside were plans, budgets, and communications about a youth center in one of the city's poorest neighborhoods. A legitimate community project funded by Rossi money. After-school programs. Job training. Mental health services. I sat back, confused. This wasn't money laundering. This was actual charity. Real help for kids who needed it. I dug deeper and found more. A scholarship fund for undocumented students. A legal defense fund for families facing eviction. Medical debt payments for hospital patients who couldn't afford treatment. Alessandro Rossi was a criminal who hurt people. But he was also funding programs that saved lives. I hate complicated monsters, I muttered to my empty apartment. On day 12, I made a mistake. Not a technical one. A human one. I was copying a particularly large set of financial files when one of Rossi's system administrators noticed unusual data transfer activity. They didn't see me. But they saw the anomaly. An alert went out. Security protocols tightened. I pulled back immediately, covering my tracks, but the damage was done. They knew someone had been in their systems. They just didn't know who or how deep. The next morning, Agent Webb called me into the office. Rossi's people know something's wrong, he said. They've hired outside security consultants to sweep their systems. I know, I said. I saw the contracts. They hired Titan Security Solutions. Can they find your backdoors? Not if I'm careful. But it means I need to accelerate timeline. If they find me, they'll purge everything and we'll lose our window. Price frowned. How much evidence do we have so far? Enough to justify warrants, I said. But not enough to guarantee convictions. I need another week to get the communications logs that tie everything together. You have 3 days, Price said. After that, we move with what we have. I won't risk you being exposed. I went back to my apartment and worked for 60 straight hours. Barely sleeping. Living on coffee and the kind of hyper-focus that only comes when everything matters. I extracted emails, recorded communications, financial transfers. Built a timeline that connected Alessandro Rossi to a dozen major crimes. And then, on the 3rd day, I found the file that changed everything. A memo from Alessandro to his brother Carlo, written 6 months ago. Carlo, I know you want to expand the pharmaceutical distribution into the schools. I'm telling you for the last time, no. We don't sell to kids. We don't use kids as runners. That's a line I won't cross. If you can't accept that, you can't be part of this family's operations. I stared at the screen. Alessandro Rossi had moral lines. Twisted lines, but lines nonetheless. He was a criminal who refused to hurt children. How many criminals could say that? I forwarded the file to the FBI along with everything else. Let them figure out what to do with a monster who had boundaries. The raids happened at dawn on the 4th day. Coordinated strikes across the city. FBI agents hit the Rossi Capital Management offices, Alessandro's home, and properties belonging to his key lieutenants. I watched the news coverage from my apartment, feeling that strange empty sensation that comes after finishing something huge. My phone rang. Unknown number. Maya Chen? The voice was male, controlled, with an accent that suggested expensive education. Speaking. This is Alessandro Rossi. I believe you've been in my computers. My blood went cold. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't insult my intelligence. Titan Security found your footprints. Took them 2 days, but they're very good. They traced you through proxy chains you thought were secure. They know where you live. I started reaching for my laptop to run. Before you disappear, Alessandro continued, I have a proposition. I'm not interested in anything you're offering. Not even information about who in the FBI leaked details of their investigation to my brother Carlo 3 months ago. I froze. What? How do you think we knew to Titan Security? Someone in your office told Carlo that federal investigators were building a case. I have proof. Names. Transcripts. Everything you need to find your rat. Why would you tell me this? Because Carlo is currently using that leak to negotiate his own immunity deal. He's offering to testify against me in exchange for witness protection. And his testimony includes lies about operations I specifically refused to authorize. He's going to send me to prison for crimes he committed while I was explicitly telling him not to. I processed this. You want me to expose the FBI leak so Carlo's testimony gets thrown out. I want you to expose the truth, Alessandro corrected. Carlo is the one who wanted to expand into schools. Who wanted to use kids as distribution networks. I stopped him. Now he's using his FBI connection to frame me for his decisions. You're still a criminal, I said. I am, he agreed. But I'm a criminal with standards. Carlo has none. If he gets immunity and I go to prison, he takes over. And every line I refuse to cross, he'll sprint over. I sat in silence, mind racing. How do I know you're telling the truth? Check the server at 192.168.45.23. Port 8443. Password is Lighthouse 2024. Everything's there. He hung up. I sat staring at my phone for a full minute. Then I did something monumentally stupid. I checked the server. It was real. Files proving that FBI Special Agent Marcus Webb had been feeding information to Carlo Rossi for 6 months. Payments. Meeting logs. Transcripts of conversations where Webb had warned Carlo about investigation timing. And communications showing Carlo planning operations Alessandro had explicitly forbidden. Including a scheme to recruit high school students as drug runners. I called Director Price. We have a problem, I said. The next 72 hours were chaos. Internal Affairs investigated Webb. His arrest was quiet but devastating. The case against Alessandro Rossi had to be reconstructed to separate evidence from potentially contaminated sources. Carlo's immunity deal collapsed when his FBI contact was exposed as corrupt. And I got a message from Alessandro Rossi. Thank you for checking. Some people assume all criminals are the same. I appreciate that you verified before deciding. I shouldn't have responded. But I did. Why do you fund the youth programs? Project Lighthouse and the others? His response came an hour later. Because I grew up in a neighborhood where kids had 2 choices, crime or nothing. I chose crime. But I've spent 20 years making sure kids in similar situations have a third option. I can't undo what I am. But I can fund what I should have been. Against all logic, I found myself typing back. That doesn't make you less guilty. I know. But it makes me responsible for fewer destroyed lives than I would be otherwise. In my world, that counts as progress. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I sent one more. The FBI will still prosecute you. The evidence is solid even without Carlo's testimony. I know, he wrote back. But Carlo won't be running things when I'm gone. My nephew Marco will. He's legitimate. Clean. He'll transition everything legal and dissolve what can't be. That's worth 20 years in prison. The trial took 8 months. I testified about the digital evidence I'd collected. Alessandro Rossi was convicted on multiple counts. Sentenced to 23 years in federal prison. Carlo got 15 years after his immunity deal collapsed. Webb got 12 years for corruption. On the day of sentencing, I received a letter. The postmark was from the federal prison where Alessandro was being held. Ms. Chen, thank you for your testimony. It was accurate and professional. Thank you for verifying Carlo's claims instead of accepting them blindly. You saved lives you'll never meet. Thank you for being someone who looks at evidence instead of assumptions. Both about computer systems and people. I was wrong about many things in my life. One thing I got right was recognizing that the fat girl nobody expected would be the one who saw everything clearly. Not just my crimes, but also what I was trying to protect. That takes a rare kind of intelligence. The kind that sees complications instead of simplifications. I hope you never have to choose between justice and mercy. But if you do, I hope you remember that sometimes they're not opposites. Sometimes they're the same thing viewed from different angles. Respectfully, Alessandro Rossi. I read that letter 5 times. Then I put it in a drawer and tried to forget about it. But 6 months later, when I was consulting on another case involving organized crime and found evidence that the target was also funding addiction treatment programs, I remembered. I made sure the prosecutors knew. Made sure the legitimate programs were protected even as the criminal operations were dismantled. Because the world isn't simple. Monsters aren't just monsters. And sometimes the fat girl everyone underestimated is the only one willing to see that complexity. 2 years after Alessandro Rossi's conviction, I got a phone call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Maya Chen? The voice was younger than Alessandro's. This is Marco Rossi. Alessandro's nephew. I remember. You took over his business operations. What's left of them? Everything's legitimate now. It took 2 years, but we're clean. I'm calling because I wanted to thank you. For sending your uncle to prison? For making sure Project Lighthouse survived, he said. For documenting which money came from legitimate sources. For helping prosecutors separate what could be protected from what had to be seized. 300 kids are in college right now because of programs you helped save. I didn't know what to say. I was just doing my job. You did more than that. You saw my uncle as a person, not just a defendant. You recognized that someone could be guilty and still do good things. That nuance saved programs that save lives. After we hung up, I sat thinking about Alessandro Rossi. About the man who'd laughed when I first suggested infiltrating his systems because he'd assumed the fat girl was just IT support. Who'd later realized I was the only person who could see his entire empire clearly enough to dismantle it properly. Who'd understood that I would verify his claims instead of dismissing them. Who'd known I could see complications that others reduced to simple good and evil. 5 years after his conviction, I received another letter. Ms. Chen, I'm up for parole review next year. I'll probably be denied. I accept that. But I wanted you to know that Project Lighthouse is expanding. Marco has tripled the funding using legitimate profits from the businesses we transitioned. Everything you documented helped improve which money was clean. Last year, they added a STEM program specifically for girls who don't fit conventional expectations. Girls who are told they don't look like engineers or programmers. Girls like you. They named it the Maya Chen Initiative. I hope that's okay. I figured you couldn't sue me for it since I'm already in prison. Thank you for seeing me clearly enough to know exactly what I was guilty of. Nothing more. Nothing less. Some people would have buried me under every crime they could connect to my name. You stuck to what you could prove. That precision saved innocent people and programs that deserved protection. I was wrong to underestimate you. Wrong to assume the fat girl didn't belong in that world. Wrong to think appearance determined capability. You taught me that lesson expensively. Respectfully, Alessandro Rossi. I read the letter 3 times. Then I looked up the Chen initiative. It was real. A STEM program in Brooklyn offering coding classes, hardware workshops, and mentorship for girls who didn't fit traditional expectations. Fat girls. Poor girls. Girls with disabilities. Girls from communities that traditionally didn't produce tech workers. They were learning that intelligence and capability had nothing to do with what you looked like. That the world's assumptions were wrong. That they belonged wherever they were smart enough to go. I stared at my computer screen with tears in my eyes. The criminal I'd helped convict had created a program in my name. Teaching girls what I'd had to learn alone. That being underestimated was an advantage if you were smart enough to use it. That monsters could recognize your worth even when heroes didn't. That sometimes the person who sees you most clearly is the one you least expect. Agent Webb had laughed at the idea of the fat girl infiltrating the mob. Alessandro Rossi had learned that the fat girl was the only one who could see his empire completely. Who could separate what deserved destruction from what deserved protection? Who could look at a complicated criminal and see both what he'd done wrong and what he'd tried to do right? I never visited him in prison. Never wrote back. But when he finally got parole in his 8th year, when he walked out of federal prison and into a supervised release that would last the rest of his life, I sent one message. The girls in your program are brilliant. You were right to name it after precision. That's what they're learning. To see things clearly. To separate signal from noise. To be exactly as good as they are regardless of what anyone expects. Thank you for understanding what I was trying to do. And what I was trying to protect. Even while taking you down. Chen. His response came 3 hours later. Thank you for being someone who could do both. The world needs people who can see clearly enough to destroy what must be destroyed and protect what deserves protection. Even when they're the same operation. Especially when they're the same operation. You taught me that by example. I hope I'm teaching others by consequence. Alessandro. I never saw him again. But sometimes, when I'm working on a case and everyone's making assumptions about targets based on limited information, I remember. The criminal who understood me better than my own colleagues. Who saw the fat girl and recognized intelligence instead of limitation. Who learned that underestimating people is expensive. And who paid that price precisely enough that good programs survived his fall. The world isn't simple. People aren't either. And sometimes the person who sees you most clearly is the one whose world you're dismantling. That's the lesson Alessandro Rossi taught me. Not through his crimes, but through his recognition that the fat girl nobody expected was exactly who he should have feared most. Because I saw everything. And I reported exactly what I found. Nothing more. Nothing less. Just the complicated truth. Can you respect someone's good actions while holding them accountable for their crimes, or does guilt erase all nuance? Share your thoughts in the comments section and do remember to hit the subscribe button, like and share this story, and I'll see you in the next one.